Okay, so now for our last speaker, Ethan of Particle.
Okay, hello everybody. So I know that this is the last talk of intent.wtf, and of course it's Thursday, so DevConnect is also about to end. So hopefully I can kind of leave you guys with something to think about here that won't be too boring. So specifically, what I want to talk about today is bringing intent-centric to life. So throughout the event today, if you guys have been here for a little while, you've probably heard intent, that word too many times. But really a lot of this is conceptual. And part of what we want to do is create a generalized implementation of intents that is actually utilized on a large scale between different applications, and of course in this case, sort of onboard consumers. So let's dive into here. Specifically, the way that we're doing this is through something called Particle Network v2, which is a collection of technologies that I'll define in a moment. But first of all, I think it's important to introduce Particle Network. Some of you guys might be familiar, of course we're hosting this event today, but the kind of TLDR is that basically what we do is we provide wallet as a service. This was our sort of core product offering for a very long time, a little bit over a year. And essentially wallet as a service is a mechanism of onboarding and interaction with applications that feels natural and seamless within its host application. So for example, you can imagine onboarding to some sort of Dex or something or game using your Google account or your email. This is kind of a big evolution in how we onboard people and, of course, facilitate interaction, in this case, through embedded wallets. So a wallet experience that isn't external, but rather internal to the actual application. So this is what we've been building. At the moment, we have over 15 million activated wallets, over 800 significant client partners that are leveraging this as a path of onboarding, specifically in this case, for sort of Web2 users or people that might not be as Web3 adjacent as many of us are. So wallet as a service, as I just defined, is great. And this is something that has been at the core of our business model for a long time, but it's undeniable that wallet as a service has a number of pretty big issues. Most of these issues actually stem from the fact that they use EOAs traditionally. This means that they're pretty rigid. You can't do a lot with wallet as a service, purely because of the fact that once you log in with your social account within a given application, you're provided with an EOA. Developers don't have a lot of room to work with here. Now, with wallet as a service, you can extend the functionalities of EOA a little bit more through things like master passwords and payment passwords derived from key management mechanism. In our case, it's called MPC TSS, but still traditionally, EOAs are incredibly binding. And our solution to this is the integration of account abstraction, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But specifically, in kind of the context of intents, a massive, massive issue of wallet as a service is that actually only solves one half of the UX problem. So the UX problem is actually two distinct issues. The first one is the process of onboarding to the point of expression, right? So from when a user actually logs in with their social account, their Google, email, Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub, right? And now have a wallet they can use to express what they want to do. This, for a long time, was a broken component of Web3. Download MetaMask and generate a seed phrase, write it down on a piece of paper, keep it safe, keep it secure yourself. This is not a good process, and we fixed this already. Account abstraction, specifically in our case, facilitated through the means of wallet as a service. Now we can onboard somebody with their already existing Web2 accounts into a smart account that is flexible and works natively within the applications in which they're integrated. Although, probably the more complicated part of this issue is where intents come in. This is the process of expression to outcome. So once a user's been onboarded and they get to the point of expression, the issue now is, well, how do they express what they want, receive an outcome? Today, this includes expressing a sequential or on very base level, step-by-step transactions, approvals, confirmation, etc., to get to where they want to go. This means that a user has to solve their own path of point A to point B, which is not very user-friendly, especially because blockchain, of course, is quite inherently complicated. So to solve both these problems, I think that we're really not going to see much onboarding until they are both solved, because it's too inaccessible. But to solve both these problems, there's kind of two core components that we see to this, right? That actually contribute to both problems almost equally. The first is smart wallet service. This is the existing wallet service that we currently have, powered by MVC TSS for key management, tied directly with account structure. So rather than leading to an externally owned account, you lead to a smart account that can be any implementation, use any bundler, any paymaster, so that applications can kind of refine their onboarding and initial utilization experience with account abstraction, sponsor gas fees, batch transactions, create custom account implementations, whatever they want to do, which is initiated by social logins with Wallet as a Service. This solves some of it. The second half is intent-centric architecture. So to actually get somebody from the point of expression to when they have an outcome, the way that we do this is with intents. This is what you guys have been hearing about all day today. This is what we need to solve this core problem. Okay, so now that we've defined kind of what the UX problem is and what particle network is, I think it's also important to define particle network V2, which you saw in the sort of introductory title slide in the beginning. So particle network V2 is a collection of different technologies. Like I mentioned, for a long time, all we had was the wallet as a service, but what we realized is that there's a lot of wallet service providers. Web3 auth privy, I mean, at the end of the day, these providers, including ourselves, are all kind of providing the same fundamental solution to that first half of the problem. But at Particle, if we want to contribute in a larger capacity to solving these crypto UX problems, we need to extend beyond wallet service to the solutions I just outlined a moment ago, which in our case is, of course, smart wallet service, on-chain account abstraction, whole different topic, we'll get into that today, but ZK WaaS, another big different topic for confidential login, and then what we're talking about today, which is the intent fusion protocol. So the intent fusion protocol is the kind of one-liner that we usually provide for this. We actually just kind of formally announced the architecture yesterday. But this is a permissionless universal framework and domain-specific language for expressing, transforming, and executing intents. So doing so in a way that is generalized and open, permissionless, and of course, in this case, universal. So not just through our wallet service, but through multiple different interfaces to express an intent typically on the developer side, have that be transformed into a list of transactions or steps that need to happen, and then have that be executed. But that's kind of a mouthful. So what is intent? It's probably heard the definition a few times. But intent really isn't universally accepted in terms of a specific definition. It's still a little bit of a debate in the community. How do you define intent? Specifically, how narrow or how broad should the definition be? Some people believe that intent should be very specific to DeFi. Others, including ourselves and people like Anoma, take a more abstract definition here. I believe this is also a definition that Essential follows as well, which is just very simply something I think you guys have heard today as well. A set of declarative constraints involving signatures that allow users to delegate transaction creation and execution to third parties without relinquishing full control over to those third parties. This is intent. It's the act of saying, I want to get to an endpoint, I have input and output constraints, I need transactions to get to that point, generate these transactions for me and execute them. This is kind of the core of what we're trying to do. This is a visualization of that. You've probably seen visualizations like these before, but the kind of TLDR here is that, of course, at the moment, with that second half of the problem, that top kind of visualization there is exactly why we need intents, because at the moment, to get from point A to point B, it is manual intervention, step 1, step 2, 3, and 4, initiated and confirmed by the user, but also discovered by the user. So the user needs to know what they want to do to get to point B, versus in our case with the intent fusion protocol and intent centricity in general, instead it's simply expression. So in this case, on the actual DSL side, this involves just simply an array of input constraints and output constraints. So what do you want as input, and what do you want as the desired output, and then what needs to happen in between this, which is usually what a user would do in the top example, is discovered and executed by the intent fusion protocol and then presented to the end user. Okay, so this is kind of a complicated graphic here, and this is something that we just announced yesterday. So this is our intent fusion protocol, specifically usage of the intent fusion protocol in the context of a single chain solution, so a solution that stays confined within the chain from which it was initiated on. It's actually at its core pretty simple. The way that we see intents is very simply a transfer of data. So in this case, like I mentioned, a transfer of input and output constraints from a user address, whether that's a smart account or an EOA, to a solver as well as a coordinator. We define this as a reactor. But as you can see, the actual flow here is pretty simple. The user, usually through the means of an application that has structured an intent, initiates a request for solver. This hits a solver network, which competes to basically provide the user with an optimal path. In this case, actually what we decided to do is allow the user to choose what path they want, dictated by the solvers that have given them multiple paths to take. Then depending on the path they take, the solver is of course rewarded, an intent object is signed and created, then passed through the reactor for coordination and execution on chain. So this is simply the architecture that we have proposed here, and coordinated by the DSL that I mentioned earlier, which is simply arrays of input and output constraints. Now, this actually extends further into cross-chain. So an example we like to give is, you can imagine you are on Polygon, and you have 100 Matic. And you want to play a game on base that costs 40 Matic to mint an NFT that the game requires to play, right? Well, at the moment, this is 4 or 5 transactions that the user has to do. The alternative here is actually doing this for the user, so discovering the cross-chain transactions, the bridging that needs to happen to get to the point where they have 100 Matic on Polygon and spend the value of that 40 Matic on an NFT used on base for a specific game. So this is the architecture there. I won't go into the specifics here. As you'll see in a moment, we have an article that outlines this, but what this enables is exactly that. So intents that aren't confined to a specific chain, but generalized execution of transactions across multiple chains. Okay, so this is kind of our vision, and you saw this graphic earlier, but our vision for an intent-centric future. So really what we want to see is that applications, most applications, especially those with potentially complex paths or a high barrier to entry, like a base-specific NFT like I mentioned, these will have native intents that can be structured and express the intent fusion protocol that users can then query and solve that involve any significant number of transactions, and therefore abstracting away the actual transactional experience for users for complex scenarios. So this means that at the moment, what usually would take 45 minutes for a given user will take maybe 2 clicks. The construction of an intent object, choosing the path they want to take, signing that, and then it's done. So this is a pretty significant evolution in how we approach transactions and how we approach actual utilization of Web3 that we believe will hopefully solve the second half of the UX problem through the means of the intent fusion protocol. If we can solve both these halves, the point of onboarding to expression, and then through that, the point of expression to having an outcome, then we'll have the sort of foundation, the infrastructure that we need to create applications, whether it's games, whether it's payments, DeFi, etc., that feel very adjacent, if not potentially even more smooth than Web2 applications. The vision is eventually that most applications that you build in the future, especially those that leverage both of these solutions, won't really feel like Web3 applications. It'll feel like Web 2.5 or something like this, because the complexity that exists natively within blockchain today will be almost entirely abstracted away through intents and through role as a service or account management. So this is the article that we posted yesterday. We actually originally announced the Intent Fusion Protocol in Singapore at our InfraCon event, and we're pretty silent about it for a while because we've been wanting to make sure that we get this right. That this is kind of a successful first real attempt at like generalized intent implementation. So we took a while. We just released this article yesterday. that dives into the architecture that I just spoke about a moment ago. Talks about the DSL, the specific like use cases of this, how this might be structured on the end user side, as well as the actual integration flow for developers. So we're going to release more academically aligned papers and articles on this in the near future that dive into questions like, well, what does a specific DSL input, like an array of input and output constraints, what does that actually look like visually? We're going to have all these questions answered in future papers that we'll hopefully be releasing in the next few months. Actually, we have a quite soon timeline in terms of full implementation of the Intent Fusion protocol, hopefully within the next few quarters. So this is something that we've been working on for quite a while, and we believe will complement our wall service quite well in achieving sort of next generation crypto UX. Okay, so I unfortunately don't have time for questions. I have another panel that I'm going to go to in a few minutes, but my name is Ethan. I go by the alias Tabasco online. You can find me on Twitter at Tabasco Web3, and of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Particle Network through the QR code there. You can also check our website, particle.network. We have a lot coming out in this. We're really focused on solving these core UX problems without sacrificing things like privacy or, of course, developer experience. So you keep up to date with everything that we're doing on that website, and definitely check out the blog posts that I showed in the last slide. That's it. Check that out. Thank you guys.